Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church, Harriman, Tennessee. And today, our ladies' Sunday school class is going to delve in looking at chapter 10 and possibly 11 in Exodus. We are marching through Exodus, learning all about the events, trying to learn all about the events that happened. The Hebrew children have been slaves for 430 so years in Egypt. That has got to be something that is just hard to deal with in your psyche. You wake up every morning knowing that your time is not your own time, your thoughts are not even your own thoughts, and you are compelled to do what another says. And you go to bed again that night with that same thought. And they've been doing that for over 400 years. By the same token, the people around you are only used to seeing you in one guise, and that is as a slave. Makes it hard for them to see you any other way. These people are tired, they're in pain, they're suffering, and God intends them to be free. So he is sending Moses and Aaron to work on that Pharaoh and the rest of the Egyptians till they're ready for them to leave. In verse 1, 2, 3, and 4 of chapter 10, then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow." We've talked about hardening your heart. Do you remember? Pretend this is your mind, your brain, open and flexible and looking at all possibilities. But when you get stubborn, when you get mean-hearted, when you get convinced that you're not going to change your mind closes, okay? You still have the ability to open your mind and take in new information to change your mind. But right now you're being stubborn and you've closed your mind to any other information. God asks us to do something and we refuse. We make excuses. I'm not talented enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not brave enough. I can't do that. That scares me. So many times that we close our mind to what God asks us to do till he says, enough. Enough. You don't want to do it? I'm tired of arguing with you. I'll just close your mind, and now you can't open it back. It's not open and flexible anymore. And that's what's happened to Pharaoh. God has listened to him, give him plenty of chances, and now he's fixed it. He's closed his mind. He also tells Moses, he said, I want your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren, their children. I want it known what happens here in Egypt. I want you to keep telling the story. I want you to inform them about what kind of a God they have, what kind of a God that's full of justice, a God that's full of mercy. I want you to expose that God to them so that they know who they're worshiping. A personal experience. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and they told him what God had said. And they also gave him a very wonderful opportunity. You see, they told him, the locusts will not be here till tomorrow. He had till tomorrow to change his mind, but he chooses not to. Moses continues to describe what is fixing to happen to Egypt and to Pharaoh. He's talking about the locust in verse 5. Let's look at 5, 6, and 7. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in the fields. They will fill your houses and those of your officials and all of the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land until now. And then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's officials have been present, and they've been drinking in everything that Moses and Aaron have said. And unlike Pharaoh, they have really been watching how it is affecting their country. And in verse 7, Pharaoh's officials say to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?" His staff is beginning to rebel against him, against Pharaoh. He is too high and mighty, too arrogant. Moses and Aaron have shown proof of what their God is and what their God can do. And his staff is scared. So, in my mind's eye, when you get to verse 8, when it says, "And Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh," I think the council, I think the staff of Pharaoh himself ran out into the hallway before they could get out of sight and brought them back. Come back. Let's talk about this some more. And Pharaoh is fuming. He likes total obedience, and his staff is now departing from that. So in verse 8, then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh speaks. He says, "Go, worship the Lord your God. But tell me who is going." Can you see Moses and Aaron look at one another? In verse 9, 10, and 11, Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old and our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to go to celebrate the festival of the Lord." The Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you if I let you go along with your women and children. Surely you are bent on evil." "No. Have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for." Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh says, "All right, I'll let you go worship the Lord, but first you tell me who is planning on making this journey of 3 days." Moses says, "We all are. Everybody. Our wives, our children, our livestock, everything we have. We're going out to follow the Lord." And Pharaoh, knowing full well, if he lets them all go, they won't all come back. If only the men went and left their wives and their children and their livelihood, they would come back. But not if they all went. So he says, "No way, Jose. You're not going." Nope. And then Moses and Aaron were driven out. Now, who drove them out? I think who brought them back was probably the Pharaoh's staff, but who drove them back out would have been Pharaoh's military that was also in attendance in this meeting room. His guard. He would have gotten them out. In verse 12, 13, and 14, "And the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over Egypt so the locusts swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail." So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. God said, "Stretch out your hand, Moses. Get it started." Moses stretched out his staff. And I want you to notice those next few words. This is something, I've studied this many times, and this is something that I've missed when I studied before, and I want you to catch it. The Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. The Lord told him that the locusts wouldn't be there till the next day, but he started the locusts coming in on a slow east wind. Locusts like to glide. They don't like to use the energy to flap their wings. And these locusts are about 2.5 inches long with about a 5-inch wing spread. It's the brown locust. That's what they think anyway, that these locusts may have looked like. And they came in. See old Pharaoh go to bed that night. Get in his raised bed. Now see the morning come. He sits up in his bed, stretches his arm, throws his feet off of the side of the bed, and crunch, 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 he lands on locusts. And he looks down just in time for two to fly, hit the brow of his head. He jumps up and he runs to the window. And what does he see? When they had the hail, have you ever been in a hailstorm, or have you ever watched a hailstorm? Even the small hail that we have in our area, if it splits a leaf, it just shatters, it just splinters that leaf. If the hail gets heavy enough or big enough and falls hard enough, it can break off little limbs. Hail such as fell before would have broken down whole trees. When that tree fell, the leaves didn't automatically turn brown right away. They would have stayed green for several days. Pharaoh is used to getting up for the last few days and seeing the devastation of crops that were bent over and broke off at the ground, of seeing it slowly turning from a vibrant green into a dull yellow and into brown. But he is not used to looking out of his window and seeing like a black mass covering the ground, and he can see no green. The green is being eaten up, every bit of it, all that was left, by these locusts. A terrific amount of locusts. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The locusts covered the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all of Egypt. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. Pharaoh said something that he's never said before in our studies so far. He's admitted to sinning against the Lord. It was a big leap for him to admit there is a Lord beside himself, and much less that he sinned against him. And he's also apologizing to Moses and Aaron, saying, I've sinned against you. He had his men hurry them out of the palace last night, but this morning he sent his soldiers to find them and bring them in. Pharaoh says, please beg for mercy for me and my country. And Moses left, and he went to talk to the Lord. And the Lord is so quick. When he's going to judge us, he's slow. He wants, in most instances, he wants to give us every opportunity that is available, and he's slow to judge. But when it comes to mercy, notice where the wind comes from. A very strong west wind. Mercy from our God is very fast. Oh my goodness. I don't know how much time elapsed from the time that the locust was driven out until the next plague occurred. But the next plague would have really worked on the security and the feeling of loss that the Egyptians felt. It was the plague of darkness. Pharaoh didn't get. Let's go back just a second. Pharaoh didn't agree to let the people go then, if you'll notice. He'll say, forgive me, I've wronged you. But he didn't say, I will now let the people go. He didn't say that. God is still working to get his achievement of getting the Hebrews out. So, one more plague is around the bend. It's the plague of darkness. It's going to last for 3 days, and it's going to be a surprise for Pharaoh. In verse 20 through 23, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. I don't know if Moses knew this by his expression. We've before had a dialogue with what Pharaoh said or what Pharaoh did. This time we did not. But he got his message across. It was lip service I was giving you to get accomplished what I wanted, but I'm not going to obey my own directives. I'm not going to let them go. So in verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt. So Moses stretched forth his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all of Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. This is a darkness that is so intense, so black, that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Our eyes search for light. I don't know if you know it or not, but they search for light. And when they can't find it, it begins to feel really tight and closed. These people were afraid to move around. In Sunday school class this morning, I cut off the light, and we're in interior classroom, so there's no windows. And when I turned it off, the only light you could see was beneath the doors, at the door sill. And there was random little electronic lights, little blues and greens, scattered throughout the room. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't heavy. That darkness didn't lay on you for many reasons. For one, all of my classmates knew all I had to do was flip a button and the light would come on. These Egyptians did not know when the light was coming back on. They were doing whatever they normally did, and all of a sudden, like in the evening hours on a winter's day when the power goes off, all of a sudden it became dark, but much more so. Look at how their life has been running for the last 7 and 8 months, dealing with all of these plagues. This would have been horribly frightening. But you know what's even more frightening? When you get to reading this, let's read on just a little bit more. Well, I thought that was there, but maybe not. I apologize for you for taking so much time right here. It's verse 23. No one could see anyone or move about for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in their places where they lived. Which tells you that while it may have been dark outside their homes, they could light up their homes. The Israelites could. They had fires, lanterns, that kind of thing. But the Egyptians, even the fires they had, gave off no light. The lanterns gave off no lights. Have you had those little bitty flashlights, the little tiny ones that when their battery is just almost gone? We've made jokes about light a match and see if it's burning. Just little bitty. light that didn't penetrate for 3 days. And they had no way of knowing how long this was going to last. It could have lasted a week. It could have lasted a month. They were afraid to move. It was oppressive. It almost felt like a blanket. It was covering them. You know, darkness is used against nations for severe sins. And you see it in different places in the Bible. And if you want to think about just when Christ was on the cross, there was a 3-hour span of total darkness while he was on the cross. Joel describes a day of darkness and the end of times. And Revelations in 16 talks about the 5th bowl of judgment is a bowl of darkness that pours out on the kingdom of the Antichrist. Darkness is used to show that God's withdrawn. It's a punishment. And it's one that would have been scary. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and he said, "Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and your children may go with you. Only leave your flocks, and your herds behind." But Moses said, "You must allow us to have sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock too must go with us, and not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping for the Lord our God, and until we get there, we don't know what we're going to be required to use to worship the Lord." Pharaoh, he's kind of given up a little bit here. But he's still holding back too. He's thinking if he holds on to their flocks that they'll surely come back. Who would want to leave their livelihood behind? They have families, and they must provide for those families. And he knew they would rebel at this. So Moses said, "No, not a hoof." Can you hear Moses' voice? And I want you to notice that Moses is talking here. This is something he does not want Aaron. He is so adamant that he was going to tell Pharaoh this himself. Hear him speak. Hear his anger. And the Lord's not going to desert his children either. And he'll leave no one behind. No one. If you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you will not be left behind. In verse 27, 28, and 29, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. And Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again." In other words, don't come asking me to go again. "The day you see my face will be the day that you die." I wonder if he really thought that he could take Moses' life. Did he not stop to think that Moses' God would protect him? And in verse 29, "Just as you say," Moses replied, "I'll never appear before you again." Not to ask. Not to ask. All right. We end chapter 10 and we go into chapter 11. Chapter 11. I'm going to try to think of a way to share this that you can understand where I'm coming from. Our Jewish people love to tell stories. We all love to tell stories, you know. But the way the westernized people tell stories and the way the Jewish people told stories back then are totally different. We kind of stick to one storyline. But the Jews will be going so far, and then there'll be something important happen. They go, "Oh, let's go cover this and make sure they understand this," and then we'll come back to the story, and we'll go again. And just because something is in this paragraph in the Bible, and then the next paragraph happens, there's no reason for you to know for sure that what happened here is immediately after the first paragraph. There might be years. There just may be days and months, but it might also be years between here and here. Joseph, when he died, until Moses' appearance, they come very, very close together in the literature, but there's over 400 years between, well, not 400, there's more like 300 years between the two. So chapter 11, I want you to notice the very first verse in chapter 11, and it says, now the Lord had. This is going back, okay? So this is information that Moses has had. I don't know how long. Maybe it's a day, a week, a month. Anyway, Moses is privy to this outside the flow that we've been going through with the plagues. I want you to remember, they were approximately 2.5 million people that were Hebrew children in Egypt at this time. There was no radio, no telephone, no television, no Pony Express, nothing to get the word out in a mass form. Things had to go from mouth to mouth. You spoke to groups of people who then went and spoke to groups of people. You could not put a blanket piece of information out there and these people get it within a day or two. This took time. So, I propose to tell you that part of what we're reading today was going on in the Hebrew homes during those days of darkness. Because just like when you live in one part of our country, you know that in other parts of the country, other things are going on. Well, this is what is happening on the Jewish side of Goshen. Let's read the first 5 verses. Now the Lord had spoke to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and of gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by rogue Pharaoh's officials and by the people. So Moses said, this is what the Lord says, about midnight I will go through Egypt. Every firstborn son of Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing through Egypt, worse than there ever has been before. This is 6 and 7. But among the Israelis, not a dog will bark at any person or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, go, you and all the people who follow you. And after that I will leave. Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. This is the Lord telling them what is going to happen and how they need to start getting prepared. He said, okay, you've seen 9 plagues. There's only one more. Moses had got to have been relieved to hear that there was only one more. He's also got to have been, I won't say frightened, but apprehensive. What in the world is it going to be before he thought? Way back, the Lord was talking about Israel as his firstborn and how he was going to affect the firstborn of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Moses is telling the people, now gather this, during those days of darkness, they would be meeting in each other's homes. He may have been telling 10 to 20 to 30 at a time. And I can see him in one place and Aaron in another. And maybe they deputized others because they had 2.5 million people to get the news to. This next plague is going to be the death of the firstborn. Remember when we started our whole story with Moses? His mother put him in a basket to save his life. Why? because Pharaoh was killing all of the children, all of the boy children of Israel. This is not the same Pharaoh, but it's the same regime. And God says, I'm treating you, I'm going to treat them like they treated you. And he says, I want you to know that I am going to set a heart and a mind in the Egyptian people, that I want my Israeli children to go to those different homes, the men and the women, and ask for gold and silver and raiment. Now, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Well, they had been slaves for 430 years, and they had never been paid, so this is part of a big payday. He knew he was going to ask them to build a tabernacle and later a temple, and they would need these resources. God knew that. He knew that they, somewhere along the line, would probably going to have to be buying supplies when they first crossed over the Jordan into the promised land. He knew that. I want you to remember Joseph and his plan, how it kept Egypt alive and made her beyond belief wealthy. God remembers that. So he's going to put their neighbors, their Egyptian neighbors, in a mind. Number one, we want you out of here. And if me giving you my gold earrings and my gold bracelets and my gold rings would help you to get out of here, go. You can have them. Get out of here. Moses, we've read about Moses when they wouldn't listen to him, when they reviled him, when he thought they were going to just not listen to him at all. We have seen him grow in influence and in stature for all the Egyptians and all the Hebrews. And then the Lord says, there's going to come a night that along about midnight, I'm going to send the death angel through Egypt, and every firstborn will die. And there will be such weeping and wailing such as never been heard before. And he's very particular about pointing out firstborn, not only of the elite, but even throughout every social strata down to the slave. And they would be loud wailing. But to show the quietness and peace that would be in Goshen with the Hebrew children, with the Israelis, he said, but among the Israelis, not even a dog's going to bark. It's going to be very quiet. And we're going to see that in chapter 12. It says, God is still talking to Moses. This is what he's told Moses to tell them. Even the officials of Egypt, of Pharaohs, are going to come down and demand that they leave. Now, this cough still lasts. Sorry about that. And Moses is going to be angry. This is a foretelling. You might remember Pharaoh was raised, not Pharaoh. Moses was raised by the daughter of Pharaoh. It's many years later, but I'm sure there's people there that he knows, that he remembers. And he also probably has a soft spot in his heart for the beauty that was Egypt. And that this Pharaoh was so hard-hearted as not to take the people in consideration and to subject them to all of this, and the fact that he will not recognize Jehovah God, after being introduced to him so strenuously, was enough to try the patience of any man. Verse 9 and 10. The Lord had said to Moses, Pharaoh will listen and listen to you. Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. Hey, don't sweat this, Moses. I know it makes you angry and you think you ought to know by now before this happens. But this is part of my plan, Moses. This is exactly what Pharaoh did to my people. Sometimes we reap what we sow. And in verse 10, Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of the country. In verses 4 through 10, we see the death of the firstborn in Egypt threatened again. This plague was first mentioned back when Moses climbed the mountain to see the burning bush. Pharaoh was obstinate. He was hard-hearted. And it hurt Moses' heart. Are you ever hard-hearted? Are you ever stubborn? Be careful with it. See you next time.